Mercedes is bracing for big fines from the FIA. Leclerc makes an insane demand of Ferrari after being outperformed by Lewis, and Newey reviews the change in the Aston Martin-Honda relationship. Let's get into the latest F1 news. Let us start with Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, because this one has been building for a while, and it finally came to a head in a way that nobody could ignore. Charles Leclerc made an aggressive request to Ferrari regarding the title race, and when I say aggressive, I mean it in the best possible way. This is not a driver throwing a tantrum. This is not someone pointing fingers at their teammates or complaining to the media. This is a calculated, confident demand from a man who genuinely believes he can win a world championship and is no longer willing to accept anything less than total commitment from his team to make that happen. Now, to understand why this moment matters so much, you have to understand the relationship between Charles Leclerc and Ferrari over the last several years. This man has given everything to that red car. He has driven cars that were not always championship worthy and somehow still put them in positions they had no business being in. He has watched opportunities slip away due to strategy calls, mechanical failures, and team errors. He has been patient, he has been professional, he has been the face of a team going through a long and painful rebuilding process. But patience has a limit, and Leclerc has reached his. The request itself is rooted in something really important. Leclerc wants Ferrari to go all in. He wants the entire team structure, the strategy department, the development resources, the race day decision-making, everything to be aligned around one singular objective. Winning the championship, not finishing second, not gathering points, winning. And what makes this so fascinating is the timing of it. Ferrari has been making genuine progress over the last season and a half. The car has improved significantly. The strategy calls, while still not perfect, have gotten better. The team dynamic has shifted. There is a real belief internally at Maranello that this is a team on the verge of something special, and Leclerc can feel it. He can feel how close they are, and that proximity is exactly what is making him push harder. Think about it from a psychological standpoint. When you are far away from something, you can be patient because the gap feels too large to close overnight. But when you are close, when you can almost touch it, that is when the urgency becomes overwhelming. That is when you start making demands. That is when you start pushing for absolute clarity on what the team is doing and why. Leclerc is not just asking Ferrari to try harder, he is asking them to restructure their mindset entirely around championship pursuit. And here is the thing that a lot of people are missing in the coverage of this story. Ferrari have a very complicated history with handling two competitive drivers. The politics inside that team have at various points been absolutely chaotic. The team orders controversies, the unequal treatment allegations, the internal tensions that have sometimes spilled into public view. Leclerc has navigated all of that while keeping his focus sharp and his public image clean, but now he is essentially drawing a line in the sand. He is saying that if Ferrari wants to be a championship-winning team again, they need to operate like one. Every single decision needs to be made with that goal in mind. What does this mean practically? It means pit strategy cannot be conservative when aggressive is needed. It means development tokens and wind tunnel time need to be directed toward performance gains that matter for the title fight, not incremental improvements. It means that when Leclerc is in a position to challenge, the team backs him fully rather than playing it safe. It means communication from the pit wall needs to be clear, timely, and decisive. All of the things that Ferrari have historically struggled with, Leclerc is now demanding they get right. And the broader context here is absolutely critical. The 2026 regulations are coming, and they represent arguably the biggest reset the sport has seen in years. New power unit regulations, new aerodynamic philosophy, a genuine reshuffling of the competitive order. If Ferrari can enter 2026 with momentum, with a team that has learned how to win, with a driver who is at the absolute peak of his powers, they could be genuinely dangerous. Not just competitive, genuinely dangerous for the title. But that requires building the right foundation now. It requires getting the habits right, the culture right, the decision-making right, before the big reset arrives. Leclerc understands this better than most. He knows that you do not just flip a switch and become a championship-winning team overnight. You have to build toward it. You have to make the decisions now that will pay off later, and his aggressive request is really him saying to Ferrari leadership, we cannot afford to waste any more time being almost there. We need to commit fully, right now, and build the kind of team culture that turns almost into actually. There is also something really compelling about how this reflects on Leclerc as a person and as a competitor. He has been at Ferrari since he was a teenager, essentially, coming through their academy system, being given his shot, and then delivering time and time again, even in difficult circumstances. He has stayed loyal when other teams have circled. He has rebuilt his contract. He is committed to this project, and that commitment gives him the standing to make these kinds of demands. He is not an outside hire asking for things before he has earned them. He is a man who has invested years of his career into this team and is now cashing in on that investment by demanding the team matches his level of commitment. For Ferrari fans, this should be incredibly exciting, because having a driver who pushes the team this hard, who refuses to accept mediocrity even when the situation might excuse it, that is exactly the kind of energy that changes cultures. Michael Schumacher did it. Niki Lauda did it in his own way. The great Ferrari champions were never passive participants. They were active architects of their success, and they dragged the team up to their level. Leclerc is trying to do exactly that, and watching whether Ferrari rises to meet him is going to be one of the most compelling storylines of the next 12 to 18 months. Now let us shift gears, because the second story is equally explosive but in a very different way. We need to talk about Kimi Antonelli, George Russell, and the comparison being drawn to the Lando Norris and Max Verstappen dynamic. And honestly, when you lay it all out, this comparison is not just clever framing, it actually reveals something profound about how rivalries work in Formula One and what we might be in for over the next several seasons. First, let us set the stage. Kimi Antonelli came into Formula One with absolutely enormous expectations. This kid was the most hyped young driver prospect in a generation. Mercedes chose him to replace Lewis Hamilton, which is not a small thing. That is one of the most pressure-filled debut scenarios you could possibly imagine. And yet, watching Antonelli adapt and develop, there is something genuinely special happening here. He is not just surviving the pressure, he is starting to thrive under it. George Russell, on the other hand, is a driver who has been at Mercedes for a few years now, has proven he is absolutely capable of winning races and fighting at the front, and who has had to navigate his own complex situation at the team. Russell is meticulous, calculated, and incredibly professional. He is a driver who squeezes every last tenth out of whatever machinery he has under him. He is not flashy, but he is remarkably consistent and remarkably intelligent in how he approaches racing and car development. So what happens when you put those two personalities together at the same team? According to the analysis being drawn in this story, the dynamic between Antonelli and Russell is beginning to mirror what we have seen develop between Lando Norris and Max Verstappen at McLaren and Red Bull respectively. Now that comparison deserves unpacking because it is doing a lot of work here. The Norris and Verstappen dynamic has been one of the most fascinating interpersonal storylines in recent Formula One. These are two drivers who share genuine friendship and mutual respect outside the car, but who are absolutely merciless toward each other on the track. They push each other in ways that make both of them better. There is a psychological edge to their battles that goes beyond just trying to beat a rival. It is personal, it is friendly, and it is intensely competitive all at the same time. The fact that they respect each other so much is exactly what makes their battles so fierce, because neither one wants to be the one who blinks first in front of someone whose opinion they actually value. Now map that onto Antonelli and Russell. You have two Mercedes drivers who are fundamentally very different in their personalities and their approaches, but who are both operating at an extremely high level. Antonelli brings this raw, almost fearless quality to his driving. He is still learning, still refining, still making the occasional error that betrays his youth, but there is a naturalness to his speed that is difficult to teach. Russell brings precision, intelligence, and experience. He has been around long enough to know exactly when to push and when to manage, when to take risks, and when to bank points. The suggestion that their rivalry could become what Norris and Verstappen have been to each other is genuinely tantalizing. Because if Antonelli keeps developing at the rate he has been, and if Russell continues to operate at his consistent level, you are going to have a situation inside Mercedes where both drivers are legitimately championship capable, and that creates a tension that is both internally combustible and externally entertaining. Here is where the psychological element gets really interesting. Within the same team, the dynamic of having two elite drivers is completely different from having a number one and a clear number two. When both drivers are genuinely capable of winning, every single race weekend becomes a negotiation. Who gets the better strategy call? Who gets the undercut? Who gets the new parts first? Who gets backed when they are both fighting for position? These questions do not have easy answers, and how a team handles them defines whether they succeed or tear themselves apart. Mercedes has been through this before. The Hamilton and Rosberg era is the most extreme example the sport has ever seen of what happens when two equally talented drivers are pitted against each other in the same machinery. That rivalry produced some of the most electrifying racing F1 has ever seen, but it also nearly destroyed the team from the inside. Toto Wolff and the Mercedes leadership will be very aware of that history as they manage the Antonelli and Russell relationship going forward. But here is what makes the Norris and Verstappen comparison so apt as a framework. Those two drivers have managed to maintain a genuinely positive relationship even while competing furiously. They have had incidents, they have had moments of tension, but broadly speaking, the personal respect has remained intact. If Antonelli and Russell can do the same thing, if they can compete at the highest level without letting it poison their relationship, then Mercedes could have something genuinely special on their hands. A true number one and number one situation where both drivers push the team to greater heights rather than dragging it into internal warfare. And let us not forget the broader championship implications of this dynamic. If Mercedes genuinely has two drivers capable of challenging for the title, that changes the strategic calculus for every other team on the grid. Ferrari with Leclerc, McLaren with Norris, Red Bull with whoever ends up alongside their lead driver, all of them would have to contend with a Mercedes team that can attack from multiple positions simultaneously. That is a genuinely formidable proposition. Antonelli's development arc is also worth dwelling on because it tells us a lot about where he is headed. When you look at young drivers who come into Formula One with enormous hype, there is typically one of two trajectories. Either the pressure crushes them and they spend years trying to recover their confidence, or the pressure acts like a forge and turns them into something even harder and sharper than they were before. Everything about the way Antonelli has been carrying himself suggests he falls into the second category. He is not running from the Hamilton comparisons or the weight of expectation. He seems almost energized by it. That quality, the ability to convert pressure into performance rather than paralysis, is one of the rarest things in professional sport. You can teach technique, you can improve fitness, you can refine racecraft, but you cannot teach mental toughness. You either have it or you do not. And the early signs from Antonelli are that he absolutely has it, which is why the comparison to what Norris became over several seasons of competing at the front is so relevant. Lando Norris spent a few years as the almost man, the incredibly talented driver who was never quite in the right machinery at the right time to fully show what he could do, and then McLaren got their act together, gave him a genuinely competitive car, and suddenly Norris transformed into a legitimate championship threat. The underlying talent was always there, it just needed the right platform to be fully expressed. Antonelli already has the platform. He is at Mercedes, in what has historically been the best resourced team in the sport. The question is not whether he has the ability. The question is whether he can develop quickly enough to truly challenge for championships before his window potentially closes. That sounds dramatic when talking about someone so young, but Formula One careers are not as long as people sometimes assume. The competitive window for most drivers, even the greats, is narrower than it appears from the outside. Russell, for his part, is not going to just roll over and play second fiddle to a younger teammate, regardless of how talented that teammate might be. He has worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and proven too much to accept a supporting role. He will push back, he will compete, and he will remind everyone, including Antonelli, exactly why Mercedes signed him in the first place. That competitive pushback from Russell is actually healthy for Antonelli's development. Being tested by a teammate of Russell's quality every single weekend is the fastest possible education in what it takes to compete at the very highest level. The Verstappen and Norris parallel holds here too. Verstappen's dominance pushed Norris to evolve his driving in ways that might not have happened if he had been competing against a weaker benchmark. The presence of the best brings out the best, and if Antonelli can use Russell's consistency and intelligence as a benchmark to measure himself against and chase down, the ceiling for his development is extraordinary. Now let us zoom out and look at both of these stories together, because when you hold them side by side, something really interesting emerges. What we are essentially seeing is the simultaneous construction of two potential championship narratives for the years ahead. One side you have Ferrari with Leclerc, a driver who has paid his dues, is entering what should be the prime years of his career, has made his ambitions absolutely clear, and is demanding that his team match his level of commitment and urgency. On the other side, you have Mercedes with Russell and Antonelli, potentially constructing one of the great internal rivalries in team history, with the added dimension of a generational talent beginning to find his footing at the highest level. And then in the middle you have McLaren, who have been the form team, who have Norris driving at an absolutely extraordinary level, who have built a genuine championship contending machine over the last couple of seasons. And you have Red Bull, who despite everything still have resources, history and competence that make them dangerous. The 2026 season and the years surrounding it are shaping up to be one of the most genuinely unpredictable and exciting periods Formula One has seen in a very long time. What strikes me most when I look at both stories is the theme of demanding excellence. Leclerc is explicitly demanding it from his team. Antonelli is implicitly demanding it from himself by choosing to stay at Mercedes under the weight of the highest possible expectations rather than finding a softer path into the sport. Both stories are fundamentally about people who have access to greatness, who can feel it nearby, and who are refusing to settle for anything less than actually achieving it. That is the kind of energy that drives champions. Not contentment, not satisfaction with near misses, but a genuine hunger that borders on obsession. The drivers who win world championships, almost without exception, share this quality. They are never satisfied. They always believe more is possible. They push their teams, they push themselves, and they push the boundaries of what the sport thinks is achievable. Ferrari and Mercedes both have drivers with this quality right now. The fascinating question is, which team, which driver, gets everything aligned at the right time to turn that hunger into actual hardware? Because wanting it is not enough. Michael Schumacher wanted it at Ferrari for years before everything clicked. Lewis Hamilton had moments at McLaren where everything felt close before it finally came together properly. The gap between almost and actually in Formula One can be painstakingly small and frustratingly persistent. But here is what gives me genuine optimism about both of these stories. The drivers involved are not making the classic mistake of blaming external factors and waiting for things to change on their own. Leclerc is actively intervening in how Ferrari operates, demanding changes rather than hoping they happen. Antonelli is engaging with the challenge of replacing a legend head-on rather than trying to step out of the shadow. That kind of proactive energy from the drivers themselves is often what tips the balance from potential to achievement. The teams, for their part, need to listen. Ferrari has heard Leclerc's message loud and clear, and the ball is now firmly in their court. Do they respond with genuine structural changes and a real championship-first mentality, or do they offer reassuring words and continue with business as usual? History gives us some reason for caution about Ferrari's ability to change deeply embedded habits, but the combination of new leadership, improving machinery, and a driver who is making demands rather than requests feels different from previous cycles. Mercedes faces a different but equally important challenge. They need to manage the Antonelli and Russell dynamic with extraordinary care. Give too much to one and alienate the other, be too even-handed, and potentially lose the moments where backing one driver fully could win a championship. The tightrope they have to walk is genuinely difficult, and getting it right will require wisdom, communication, and probably a few uncomfortable team meetings along the way. For us as fans, both of these stories represent exactly what we want from Formula One. We want drivers who care deeply, who push hard, who refuse to accept limitations. We want team dynamics that are genuinely complex and genuinely contested. We want the sense that something important is at stake and that the people involved understand that. And right now, between Leclerc at Ferrari and the Antonelli and Russell situation at Mercedes, we have all of that in abundance. The next time you watch a race weekend and you see Leclerc pushing beyond what the car maybe should be capable of, remember this moment. Remember that he sat down and essentially told Ferrari that this level of commitment is the minimum requirement going forward. And the next time you watch Antonelli and Russell navigating their internal battle while trying to be faster than everyone else on the grid, remember that what you are watching is potentially the beginning of one of the great teammate rivalries in the sport's history. Formula One has always been at its best when great drivers are surrounded by high-stakes narratives, when the racing itself is inseparable from the human stories underneath it. Right now, we have those stories in abundance, and they are getting more interesting by the week. Whether it is Leclerc finally breaking Ferrari's long title drought, or Antonelli announcing himself to the world as the next generational talent, while Russell refuses to be overshadowed, the next chapter of this sport is going to be something worth watching very closely. So make sure you are subscribed, because we are going to be covering every twist and turn of these storylines as they develop. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Can Leclerc actually push Ferrari to a championship with his demands? And do you think the Antonelli and Russell dynamic can stay, as the sport suggests, competitive but respectful, like Norris and Verstappen have managed? Or does it inevitably turn into something messier as the stakes rise higher? These questions do not have answers yet. That is what makes them so compelling. The story is still being written, and every race weekend adds another chapter. Formula One in 2026 and beyond is shaping up to be genuinely unmissable, and I, for one, cannot wait to see how all of this plays out. The grid is stacked, the narratives are rich, the talent level is extraordinary, and the drivers at the center of both of these stories are leaving absolutely nothing on the table. That is the sport at its absolute best, and we are right in the middle of it. Do not go anywhere. Right, so we are less than 2 weeks away from the Dutch Grand Prix, and the Formula One world is absolutely buzzing right now. 2 massive stories have dropped that every single fan needs to know about, and I promise you, by the end of this video, your understanding of where this sport is heading will be completely different. We have got Adrian Newey's grand plan at Aston Martin finally starting to make sense, and we have got a grid penalty situation brewing at Mercedes that could genuinely shake up the championship picture. So stay with me, because this is going to be a good one. Let me start with the Newey story, because honestly, this is the kind of saga that comes along once in a generation in Formula One. When Adrian Newey announced he was leaving Red Bull, the entire paddock went into a frenzy. This is the man who designed championship-winning cars across multiple decades, the man whose fingerprints are on some of the most dominant machines this sport has ever seen. Everyone wanted him. Ferrari were linked. Multiple teams were supposedly in the running. And then Aston Martin swooped in and secured what many people are calling the most significant signing in the history of their current project. But here is the thing that not everyone fully grasps yet. This is not just about getting a legendary designer to draw some fast cars. There is a much bigger strategic picture forming at Silverstone, and it involves a relationship that could fundamentally alter the power structure of Formula One. Let us talk about Honda, because Honda's involvement in this story is absolutely critical to understanding what Aston Martin is actually building. Honda, as most of you know, had a complicated exit from Formula One as an engine supplier a few years back, only to then return in partnership with Red Bull before eventually deciding to step back and let Red Bull powertrains take over their technology. But Honda never truly fell out of love with Formula One. The new engine regulations coming in 2026 represent a completely fresh start, a clean sheet of paper, and Honda saw an opportunity to come back in a meaningful way. They partnered with Aston Martin, and that partnership is now central to everything the team is trying to achieve. Now here is where Newey comes in and why the timing of his arrival is so significant. The 2026 regulations are not just a new set of rules, they represent arguably the biggest technical reset in the sport's modern history. The power unit regulations are changing dramatically, with a much greater emphasis on electrical deployment. The aerodynamic regulations are being completely overhauled. Essentially, every team is starting from scratch, and in a from-scratch environment, who do you want in your corner? You want the greatest technical mind the sport has produced. That is who? Aston Martin essentially looked at this window, this narrow window where experience matters less than raw innovation, and decided this was the moment to land Newey and build around him and around Honda's power unit development simultaneously. What makes this particularly fascinating is the relationship dynamic between Newey and Honda. These are not two entities that have simply been thrown together. There appears to be a genuine alignment in philosophy and ambition. Honda brings incredible engineering pedigree from their time in the sport, their understanding of hybrid systems, their motorsport DNA going back decades. Newey brings the chassis and aerodynamic genius that nobody in the paddock can match. When you marry those two things together under the same roof, pointed at the same set of regulations, at the same moment in time, you have a genuinely credible championship threat. Not immediately, perhaps, but within a very specific and not too distant time frame. And this is where I think a lot of casual fans are misunderstanding the Aston Martin project. People look at their current results and they scratch their heads. They see a team that has struggled for consistency, a team that has not lived up to the expectations that their enormous factory investment perhaps implied. But Lawrence Stroll, whatever you think of him and his methods, has never been building for today. He has been building for 2026 and beyond. Every single decision he has made, including hiring Fernando Alonso, including the investment in the factory, including now securing Newey, has been about creating the conditions for success at the precise moment when the regulations give everyone an equal opportunity. Think about it from a chess perspective. You are Lawrence Stroll. You know that the 2026 regulations are coming. You know that every team is going to have to essentially start over in terms of car design philosophy. You know that Honda is building what they believe will be a competitive power unit for those regulations. You position your team now, you get the best designer in the sport on board before the regulations hit, and you align your chassis development philosophy with your engine partner's direction from the very beginning. That is not a random collection of good decisions. That is a coherent, long-term strategy playing out in real time. Now I want to address the skeptics for a moment, because there are plenty of them. Some people point to Newey's age and wonder whether his best work is behind him. Some people question whether the culture at Aston Martin is right for him, whether he will have the creative freedom he thrived on elsewhere. These are legitimate questions. Newey is not in the early years of his career. He is arriving at a team that has never won a Formula One race, surrounded by infrastructure that is still being built out. The challenge is enormous, but I would argue those same conditions, that blank canvas, that genuine sense of building something from nothing, might actually be exactly what motivates a man of his temperament at this stage of his life. He is not going to Aston Martin to maintain existing success. He is going there to create something entirely new, and for a designer of his caliber, that kind of challenge might be irresistible. The Honda dimension also adds something really important here that I do not think gets discussed enough. When Red Bull and Honda worked together, they won championships. They were extraordinarily successful. Newey was a central figure in those cars, even if the engine relationship was sometimes complicated to navigate. Now you have a situation where Newey and Honda are on the same team, working together rather than in the slightly arm's-length way that exists between a constructor and a separate engine supplier. The integration possibilities are different, the communication lines are shorter, the philosophical alignment can be deeper. That matters in ways that are difficult to quantify, but that anyone who understands how Formula One cars are designed will tell you is genuinely significant. So what does success look like for this project? I think realistically, you are not going to see Aston Martin winning championships in the next 12 months. But if everything comes together, if the Honda power unit hits its targets for 2026, if Newey's design philosophy translates successfully to the new regulations, if the factory infrastructure that has been built delivers the production capacity and quality that the team needs, then you could be looking at a genuine front-running team by the late 2020s. And in a sport where the same 2 or 3 constructors have dominated for extended periods, the emergence of a new genuine contender would be one of the most exciting storylines the sport has seen in years. Alright, let us shift gears completely because the second story today is much more immediate and has direct implications for what is happening right now in this actual season, and it involves 2 drivers who share a garage at Mercedes, which is always a fun dynamic to dig into. Kimi Antonelli. If you follow Formula One at all, you know this name, the young Italian driver who Mercedes essentially identified as a future world champion while he was still a teenager. He came in to replace Lewis Hamilton, which is, let us be honest, one of the most pressure-filled seats you could possibly inherit in the entire history of this sport. And he has had a genuinely impressive debut season in many respects. Raw pace has been evident. There have been moments of real brilliance, but there have also been incidents, accidents, the kind of mistakes that come with inexperience at this level. Now here is the issue that is building up. Penalty points. In Formula One, drivers accumulate penalty points on their super license for various offenses, ranging from causing collisions to ignoring flags to unsafe releases and a whole host of other infractions. Accumulate 12 of these points within a 12-month rolling period, and you receive a 1-race ban. It is a system designed to discourage dangerous or reckless behavior, and it is entirely automatic once you hit that threshold. The stewards do not get to exercise discretion at that point. The ban happens. Antonelli currently has a penalty point situation that is raising eyebrows in the paddock. The precise tally and the specific incidents contributing to it have been building throughout his first season, which is not entirely unusual for a rookie in their first year at this level. The learning curve in Formula One is brutal. The margins are tiny. The consequences of errors are much bigger than in any of the junior categories. Rookies accumulate points. It happens. But what is concerning people close to the Mercedes camp is the combination of his current total and the timing of when certain points might expire versus when the most important races of the season are taking place. Let me explain the rolling window thing more clearly, because I think a lot of fans do not fully understand how this works. The 12-point limit does not reset at the start of every season. It is a rolling 12-month window. So points you picked up at a race 12 months ago will drop off your total, but points from more recently stay on. This creates situations where a driver might be fined for several months and then suddenly find themselves in a precarious position if points are slow to expire while new ones are being added. For Antonelli, the concern is that if he receives any further penalty points in the near term, he could be edging into genuinely dangerous territory regarding that 12-point threshold. Now let us bring George Russell into this conversation because his situation is actually somewhat separate but exists in parallel at the same team, which creates a fascinating internal dynamic. Russell is a driver who has matured enormously over the past couple of seasons. His racecraft is cleaner than it was when he first arrived at Mercedes. He is a much more measured operator than he was at Williams. But he too has accumulated some penalty points this season, and the question hanging over the team is whether either of their drivers could end up serving a grid penalty or a race ban at an inopportune moment in the championship. Here is what makes this story so interesting from a sporting perspective. Mercedes are currently in a position in the Constructors' Championship where they cannot afford to simply throw away points. Every race matters. If one of their drivers were to serve a race ban at, say, a circuit that historically suits their car, or during a run of races where they might be expected to score heavily, the impact on their season could be significant. We are not talking about a hypothetical somewhere down the road. We are talking about a very real possibility that the team's management will be having serious conversations about right now. there is also the psychological dimension to consider. Formula One drivers are creatures of intense focus and confidence. Having a penalty point situation hanging over you is a distraction. It creates a little voice in the back of your head when you are in a wheel-to-wheel battle, when you are making a split-second decision about an overtaking maneuver, when you are deciding whether to push or back off after a safety car restart. The best drivers in the world say they compartmentalize these things, and to a large extent they do, but the best teams in the world also know that removing unnecessary distractions from their drivers is part of the job. Mercedes will be very aware of this. Let us talk about Antonelli specifically for another moment, because I think his situation is particularly nuanced. He came into this season with enormous hype and enormous pressure. The comparisons to Hamilton were immediate and relentless, which is entirely unfair, but also entirely inevitable given the circumstances. He has shown throughout the year that his fundamental speed is not in question. He belongs in Formula One. He belongs at Mercedes. But incidents have happened, and the thing about the penalty point system is that it does not distinguish between malicious behavior and honest mistakes made by a young driver still finding his feet. Both result in the same marks on your super license. What Antonelli needs right now, and what Mercedes need to manage carefully, is a run of clean, mature races. Not necessarily spectacular results, though obviously those are welcome. But races where the incidents do not happen, where the judgment calls are right, where the experience that can only be gained by doing it week after week gradually translates into fewer mistakes, the talent is clearly there. The question is whether the maturity and the race management skills develop quickly enough to keep him clear of that 12-point threshold at the moments that matter most. Russell's situation is slightly different because he is an established driver. He has been through the penalty point pressure before. He understands the consequences in a more visceral, experienced way than Antonelli does. His challenge is more about continuing the disciplined racecraft that has defined his better performances this season, while still being aggressive enough to fight for the results his championship position demands. It is a balancing act that every experienced Formula One driver navigates, but the penalty point element adds an extra layer of complexity to that calculation. I also want to make a broader point about this penalty point system and what it reveals about the challenges facing young drivers entering Formula One in the current era. The grid has become incredibly competitive. The pace differences between the front and the back of the field are smaller than they have been at almost any point in the modern era. That means the racing is closer. That means the opportunities for incidents are more numerous. A young driver coming in for the first time is not just learning a new car, they are learning how to navigate racing situations with 20 drivers who are all pushing incredibly hard in incredibly close proximity to each other. The margin for error is essentially zero, and yet the learning process inherently involves making errors. It is a genuine tension in the system, and Antonelli's penalty point situation is a very visible manifestation of that tension. Now, what happens if either Mercedes driver does pick up enough points to trigger a ban? Let us game this out briefly. If Antonelli were to serve a one-race ban, Mercedes would need a replacement driver. They have Andrea Kimi Antonelli's replacement in the junior program, various academy drivers at different stages of development. But parachuting in a junior driver for a single race is not straightforward. It disrupts the rhythm of the team. It requires a driver who has enough super license points of their own to be eligible, and it means losing whatever points Antonelli might otherwise have scored in that race. For a team fighting in the Constructors' Championship, that scenario is genuinely painful. If Russell were to serve a ban, which is perhaps less likely given his experience but not completely off the table, the problem is different but equally significant. Russell is at a stage of his career where every race is an opportunity to cement his status as a race winner and potential champion. Missing a race is not just about lost points, it is about lost momentum, lost data, lost development time with a car that is still evolving. These are the kinds of considerations that Formula One team principals lie awake thinking about at 3 in the morning. Alright, so how do these two stories connect? At first glance, they might seem completely unrelated. One is about a long-term strategic play by a midfield team with ambitions of championship glory. The other is about a near-term regulatory headache at one of the sport's most storied constructors. But I think there is a thread that connects them, and it is this. Formula One in 2026 is going to look very different from Formula One right now. The technical regulations reset, Honda and Newey and Aston Martin are all positioning themselves for that moment. But the human stories, the narratives around drivers, around team politics, around the management of talent and ambition, those are going to continue regardless of the technical changes. Antonelli represents the future of Formula One. He is the kind of driver that the sport needs to invest in and develop carefully, not just for Mercedes' sake, but for the sport's sake. A driver of his potential, in a car capable of winning races and potentially championships, is exactly what Formula One's long-term health depends on. But that future is not guaranteed. It requires careful navigation by the people around him, by the stewards who make judgment calls, by the team that manages his development, and ultimately by Antonelli himself as he continues to grow into the role. Similarly, the Newey Aston Martin Honda alliance represents a kind of bet on the future. A belief that the 2026 regulations will create conditions where smart engineering and bold vision can overcome the established order. If that bet pays off, Formula One gets a new genuine championship-level team for the first time in a long time. If it does not, Lawrence Stroll will have spent an enormous amount of money and attracted an enormous amount of talent for results that never quite matched the ambition. But here is the thing about Formula One that I keep coming back to. This sport rewards the bold. The teams that have dominated over the decades have done so because, at some point, somebody made a brave, unconventional decision that turned out to be exactly right. Red Bull's original rise to dominance was not inevitable. Mercedes' extraordinary run of championships in the hybrid era was built on decisions that looked questionable at the time. Every great chapter in Formula One's history started with somebody betting on a vision that others were skeptical about. Aston Martin are betting on a vision. It is a coherent vision, well-funded, well-staffed, pointed at the right moment in time. Whether it works is a question that will not be answered for another few years at least, but the ingredients are more interesting than they have been at any point in the team's current history. And Adrian Newey, Honda, a proper factory, a committed billionaire owner, and the incoming 2026 regulations all coming together at the same time is not a coincidence. It is a plan. And for Antonelli and Russell, the immediate challenge is different. It is about surviving the present while not damaging the future. Formula One has a way of derailing promising careers at unexpected moments. Penalty points and race bans are among the more mundane ways that can happen, but they are real, and they matter, and any team worth its salt manages these situations proactively rather than reactively. So as we head into the Dutch Grand Prix and the second half of this season, these are the storylines I am tracking above everything else. Not just who wins on Sunday, as important as that always is, but the structural shifts that are happening underneath the surface of the current competition. The positioning, the alliances, the long games being played by people who are thinking not just about this weekend, but about 2026 and 2027 and beyond. Formula One has always been a sport that rewards the people who can see around corners. Who can anticipate where the regulations are going, where the talent is developing, where the competitive balance is about to shift? Right now, in the summer of 2026, there are people in this paddock who believe they can see around the corner clearly enough to bet everything on what is coming. Newey is one of them. Honda are another. Stroll is another. Whether they are right will be one of the defining stories of the next era of this sport. And in the meantime, we have the very immediate and very human story of two exceptional drivers at the most famous team in Formula One history, navigating a system that does not care about your talent or your potential or your previous achievements. 12 points is 12 points, and the steward's computer does not blink when it writes up a race ban. That is the beauty of Formula One. It operates simultaneously on multiple timescales. There is the timescale of a single lap, a single corner, a fraction of a second. There is the timescale of a race weekend, there is the timescale of a season, and then there is the timescale of eras, of regulatory cycles, of the kind of generational change that Newey and Honda and Aston Martin are positioning themselves for. All of those timescales are operating at once, all the time, and the teams and drivers and engineers who succeed are the ones who can manage all of them simultaneously without losing sight of any of them. I genuinely believe the next 3 or 4 years in Formula One are going to be among the most exciting the sport has ever produced. New regulations, new power units, new teams genuinely capable of competing for championships, new drivers coming through who will define the sport for the next decade. Antonelli might be one of them. There will be others. And somewhere in a design office in Silverstone, a man who has already reshaped the sport multiple times over is bending his mind toward the challenge of doing it one more time with a new team and a new engine partner and a new set of regulations to crack open. That is the story of Formula One in August 2026. And it is a very good story indeed. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe, because we are going to be covering every development as this season and the lead up to 2026 unfolds. Drop a comment below, letting me know which storyline you are more excited about. Is it the Newey and Aston Martin long game, or are you more focused on what happens with Antonelli and Russell in the near term? I genuinely want to know what you think. Hit the like button if this was useful, share it with your Formula One friends who might have missed these stories, and I will see you in the next one.